given that the two gentlemen who just previously graced the podium took quite a number of shots at policy. So, Minister, I'm going to allow you just some opening remarks and a few comeback shots at the gentleman at the table.
Well, let me start first by saying good evening to everybody and really make the point that the IDC backs both of them. What is it in a way that represents our policy framework? If I had to simplify it, Nozipho, I would identify 6 I's. The first one, and it goes to the question that Peter has raised, is infrastructure. It's really building. We are currently involved in the country's largest infrastructure program. We're spending about R1 billion per working day just in laying the foundations for long-term growth. So that's one area that a society expects government to invest. The second area, and it's one that I think many in the room would be familiar with, is industrialization. Focusing on how to turn the opportunities in the economy, the things that you and I consume, that dress that you're wearing, the pen you're using, into local opportunities in our economy. The third I is investment. And here I think the IDC in particular comes into its own. I want to tell you, Nozipho, that since 1994, the IDC has invested about, Jeffrey, 150 billion rand in the South African economy. Now, that's an enormous sum of money that drives the way in which this economy functions. The fourth I is innovation, doing things differently. And a fantastic example of innovation is, and it's a bit iconic of the IDC, is an investment in a company whose products you may have seen if you're a fan of Grey's Anatomy. Do you watch Grey's Anatomy?
Absolutely.
You are, you're a fan. Now, somewhere in one of those episodes, Nozipho, this really bad moment, a car accident, someone gets injured, it's very critical, ambulance comes, and the lights are blaring, not blue lights, red lights. And the patient is put in and rushed to hospital. When we get to hospital, the doors are flung open very dramatically, and you have these very good-looking doctors and nurses.
Always.
And the patient is taken to the trauma unit, and in the trauma unit, they're placed immediately, 10 seconds later, in front of this big scanning machine. And the doctors poke at a screen, and you have this enlargement of the bone structure. And you see this fracture. And immediately, a doctor dashes off, does the operation, lots of tension, sweat, and so on. And at the end of all of that, patient lives and everybody has coffee. Now, that machine is made in South Africa. That machine is based on South African intellectual property. In other words, we invented it here. And that machine is owned by a South African company in which the IDC is a 93% shareholder. Now, that for me is an illustration of innovation. The fifth I that I want to tell you briefly about is inclusion. An economy is not only about growing the GDP, it's about how you bring people, South Africans, into that economy. Small business development, giving hope to young people, providing opportunities for workers who work in the workplaces of the nation to earn a decent income. And the final I, a very important I for us, is integration, is integrating the opportunities on the African continent, taking a part of the world economy that's fastest growing, and finding opportunities not only for South African business, but for Africans across this continent of ours to build things, to make things, to grow things, to create value here, that's really what our policy framework is about. And of course, there are challenges, and I think you're going to be talking to me about some of the challenges. But we have in the Industrial Development Corporation, I think, an unusually important institution, one that we can all be hugely proud of. This is a national asset, the IDC. And really, as government, when I hear Sipho and I hear Peter talk and offer friendly advice, we don't take it as criticism. In fact, that's what South Africans, that's who we are. We talk, we criticize, we work together, we solve enormous problems, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Minister, if I just get back into the ring and again put you in one corner and put the gentleman in the other corner, one of the issues that they raised was policy certainty. Today we talk about the 5 I's, and we know that the economic blueprints, whether it's the National Development Plan or the New Growth Path or IPAD, are all long-term visions. What is your view around the certainty around industrial policy in South Africa, and how do we bring comfort to investors to give them comfort and endorsement that certainty is certainly a reflection of the policy landscape in South Africa?
Well, let me start by saying that I agree that policy certainty is important. Investors are not going to put at risk enormous sums of money if they don't know what the investment horizon looks like. So point taken. But I think over the last few years we've demonstrated very clearly in volatile global conditions a high measure of policy certainty, at least in key areas of industrial policy. And let me give 1 or 2 examples. And I want to give an example, Nozipho, that talks to localization. 5 years ago, if you looked at the South African transport landscape, every new minibus taxi was imported. Every bus that was bought by a municipality was imported. And we used the policy framework of government to put in place a set of measures that secured huge new investment in taxi manufacturing, 2 new factories, basically, one brand new factory and one expanded production facility was created. In bus manufacturing, about 6 new enterprises were started. And today we have more than 35,000 taxis that have been made here in South Africa. Now, the people who've invested there would not have done that if they had not felt that there was sufficient certainty on policy for the long term. Are we getting some things wrong? Yes, we are. We're dropping the ball here and there. But by and large, I think the storyline on industrial development has been certainty. Companies have been able to invest, to secure returns in very, very difficult circumstances. So I know, of course, that there are areas that we need to improve. And I would say that what an investor critically needs is both policy certainty, but there are also other areas that's important to investment. They need to know that they've got infrastructure that they can bank on, that there's a skilled labor force, that there's competition in the market, that you're not excluded if you're a new entrant. Those are some fundamental areas, and in each of those, there are things that we are doing and that I'd like to talk to you about.
Absolutely, Honourable Minister, and I think I want to go back to the point that you've just raised around a focus on localizing industrialization. I want to go back to this debate that has been quite prominent in South Africa around the development of black industrialists. Give us a sense from where you sit in terms of the progress you think we've made in this regard, and how do you think policy can be sharpened further to make sure that we accelerate gains in that direction?
Okay. Well, let's have a look backward first. Or perhaps let me start with saying, why is black economic empowerment important for us? Very often the argument is made about the historical inequities, the need for redress. And of course there are those arguments. But there's a more fundamental commercial rationale to empowerment. And that is, you're not going to build a solid, sustainable economy using the talent pool of only 4 million South Africans. If you have a nation of 55 million people, find talent across all parts of that society. And it cannot be that China would have grown as fast as it did if it relied on only a small number of Chinese to draw its talent pool from. So I think that there's a compelling argument why we need to go this direction. We've made some progress. The IDC, for example, in the 21 years of democracy, has invested about 60 billion rand in companies that have at least 25% black ownership. Now that sum of money has very often given black South Africans a stake in companies. Where we now see the need to be is not to have 25% or 30% or indeed 40% of a company, but to be the major shareholder and to effectively control the operation, to bring more South Africans into making things, into digging things, into growing things. So the IDC has done a few things there. I can give you an example of, I don't know what shoes you're wearing tonight, but are you familiar with this very comfortable pumps that you can carry in your bag and you can get to work? You can kick off the high heels and put the pumps on.
Do you have a pair?
We have a pair that's locally made. And we have a pair that creates jobs in South Africa and actually is fantastic. Now, there was a black South African woman who looked at the clothing and footwear industry, and everybody was saying, look, this industry is dying. And she said, I have the energy to do something different here. And she set up a factory in a place called Elsie's River, and she's now making large numbers of pumps and other women's footwear that's flying off the shelves in South Africa. She's created 300 jobs. Her plan is to build that to 500 jobs. Now that woman was backed by the IDC, and she's one of a number of black industrialists that have already been supported by the IDC. So when I sat down with the board and with Jeffrey Trainer, we said, how do we scale this up? We're doing the right things, but it's done not on scale. To transform a country, you don't need a few anecdotal good news stories. You need to be able to give opportunity to hundreds of thousands, to millions of people. And that's what we're doing now. We've created a fund of 23 billion rand whose sole focus is the development of black industrialists. And we will be providing concessional funding to black South Africans with great ideas, with passion, with drive, with energy, who we can help to get a good business plan in place, and who can get a discount to the kind of costs that they would receive there in normal capital markets. But that's not sufficient. So while we're doing that in the IDC, we're sitting down now with state-owned companies and large government departments, and we say, how can you tweak your procurement system so that both on the demand side and on the supply side, demand for goods, supply of capital, we can help to support and strengthen black South Africans' role in the economy. So there's a few examples of tweaking it. But in doing that, it's also about empowering black South Africans in areas like skills development. The other day, I went to eThekwini, and we launched the Quantum Taxi, the new Quantum Taxi. And it's a taxi that's manufactured in South Africa. It doesn't have IDC support directly, but it's a good story of how we brought that taxi back to South Africa. And we walked around the factory, and Dr. Johan van Zyl, the CEO, he's now been appointed CEO of Toyota Europe, a South African who makes us proud by bringing passion and commitment and energy to his work. And I noticed as I was walking on the production floor, in each key section, it was a black engineer who introduced that part of the work, a mechanical engineer, a materials engineer, an electrical engineer, chemical engineer in the paint shop. And I said to him at the end, Johan, where do you find your people? And he said, I find them from Nelson Mandela University. I find them from the local University of Technology. I find them from places locally. And I said, what about the complaint that our universities are not producing people? And he said, Minister, I want to tell you my philosophy. Universities are there to make people think. It's my job to teach people how to work. So I've taken these youngsters, I've put them through the discipline of production on a factory floor, and I've turned them into some of the best. And parts of what you've seen there are some of the best operations in Toyota globally. Now, if Johan can do that, I think any enterprising South African company can do that. And that's our challenge, that black economic empowerment, yes, it's equity, it's management control, but it's also developing the skills base of black South Africans.
Minister, let's add the youth layer to that analysis. And again, the youth received quite a bit of attention in the previous conversation. How do we begin to shape the minds of young people so that they see themselves as young industrialists and emerging industrialists? What do we need to change to make sure that that mindset shift also changes?
Nozipho, I think there's a few things that immediately springs to mind. The first is opportunity, is to let young people see that they're not only being trained to be workers, that they can be entrepreneurs, they can shape the world in their image. When you think of the iconic companies of today, they're no longer your Fords and your General Motors. They're in the new economy, the economy that young people dominate. If you have young brothers and sisters, you'll know their ICT skills, their texting, their social media skills. And a whole world has been created there. But that same energy, that same sense of enterprise can really be applied everywhere. So what we're doing now is the IDC says, how can we communicate differently with young people? And they're going to bring a few young managers in who can speak the language of youth. The second thing is to change a culture of fear of failure. You know, when you're an entrepreneur, it's not a guarantee that you'll succeed. You start things, it may not work out. If you've learned some important things and you start something else, that's what makes a winning nation. That's what entrepreneurship is all about. And it's to let the IDC have the appetite to back young people. You know, I think one of the great things about the IDC is it's a patient investor. It's not an investor that wants a quick return. And some of the companies and some of the people that the IDC has supported over the years, when I ask them what has been the best thing of your relationship with the IDC, is it the lower cost of capital? They say, well, we like the low cost, but it's the fact that we have a partner here that can think long term. And young South Africans need that. They need people who can believe in them, who can unleash that potential, who can take risks with them, and who can change our economy in the process.
Minister, just to extend that thought of young people, let's extend it with this idea of the future industries. Earlier we heard about biotechnology perhaps being one of those sectors. Of course, again, leveraging off ICT, that's also an opportunity there, what comes next. What role can development finance institutions play in making sure that as a country we're adequately prepared from a policy and an environment point of view to take optimal and maximum advantage of future industries?
Jeffrey Kleiner, when he spoke earlier, he mentioned that one change that the IDC is bringing about internally is to focus on value chains. But there's something else that he's pioneering with his team that I think is worth backing. And that is seeing the IDC's role, not as a passive bank. We look at an application that comes in and we put it through 20 tick box things, and if it meets all of that criteria, we give you money. But to say that the role of the IDC is to find winners, to find opportunity in the economy. So technology is reshaping our world. Yes, I think biotechnology will be very significant in future, as with all the new micro technologies, as with 3D printing, a a way of conceiving of manufacturing in a completely and fundamentally different way. Now, South Africa can either be a follower, simply providing the assembly muscle to the ideas of others, or we can infuse innovation in the way in which we manufacture. So inside the Industrial Development Corporation, there is a fund, some money that's available for risk funding, for backing entrepreneurs who are basically going out on a limb, risk capital that is important for these new technologies. And in a week or two's time, I've been invited to Grootskie Hospital to look at a new X-ray machine that detects breast cancer. It's new technology. It's different to the normal one. It's backed by the IDC. Will it survive? Well, it's one of those risk areas. It takes the frontier of knowledge in South Africa, it converts it to a new product. The president has launched Operation Pakisa in the oceans economy. And we see opportunities there also for doing things in new ways. So there's a few new areas. I recall a factory visit I did a few months ago. You know, we've got a big problem with cable theft, where people steal cable from our national infrastructure resources, and you sit without lights and you blame Eskom. Sometimes it's not load shedding. Sometimes it's literally cable that's taken. And the IDC is now backing a company that's developing new technologies to reduce cable theft. So those are ideas that I think we like. And my colleague Naledi Pandor is passionate about the fact that a country that doesn't invest in research and development is always going to be a follower, never a leader. So if you look at the industries of the future, we're not going to be here in 75 years, but if we look 20 years from now and we look back, what role would we want to have played as a government and as an IDC? I think it's one in which we see an African continent that is highly industrialized, that produces not products on the specifications of others, but develops new ideas, that takes its agriculture and its mineral wealth, and it transforms a portion of that locally. And it sells high value-added products to the rest of the world. And it is high services coming from our universities that support that manufacturing, that agriculture, and that mining base, that has advanced finance and infrastructure services that feed off that productive economy. And of course, it is a country that the world wants to visit. But to achieve that requires partnerships. Government can do some of that. I think an important part of that can be done by government. But the other part are the people sitting in the audience, industrialists, South African business people who need to embrace opportunities with government. And then there's another silent part that is not often spoken of in rooms like this, and that is organized labor. You look at Japan and you look at Germany, two economies that were physically destroyed during the Second World War. And they both have become of the largest and most powerful economies in the world. And in both of those cases, at the core of the industrialization model was partnership. Partnership at the workplace between business and labor, partnership in the society between government and industry. Now, partnership is not a feel-good, we all sit together and we praise each other. It's dealing with difficult things. It's everybody bringing something to the table in order to grow the economy and to share the fruits of that economy in an equitable way. That really is the challenge we need to respond today. It's our generation's responsibility. And when the next generation look forward, look back, then they can say we've resolved that. You know, the IDC was formed in 1940. At the time, Jan Smuts was still the prime minister. Think of how long ago that was. Russia and the United States were in alliance against Germany. Nelson Mandela had not even joined the ANC yet. That's how long ago the IDC was formed. And over this period, it's dramatically changed part of our industrial trajectory. But it's our opportunity now, I think, to do the same great things, not just in South Africa, but on the African continent.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think the Minister has said it all. On the basis of public-private partnerships led by the private sector, supported by government, and not at the exclusion of organized labor, the future industries that he spoke about, and of course the policy that needs to be sharpened to make sure that we can take full advantage of those opportunities. A very big thank you to Honorable Minister.